Brahma Viharas are spoken of in the Yoga Sutra. We talked about them a little bit last week and wanted to go into more detail today. So what we'll do is talk about them in a more philosophical sense in the beginning, and then take a step back and look at them in context of daily life and our daily lives today and in general, and kind of look at them from various perspectives.
Good. So we should look first just at that one verse in the Yoga Sutra that talks about them, and then see if that leads us anywhere, as promised. So it's verse 33 of the first chapter, the first pada, and it's like this. Maitri, Karuna, Mudita, Upekshanam, Sukha, Dukkha, Punya, Apunya, Vishayanam, Bhavanata, Chitta Prasadanam. And so, we'll start at the end. Often in translating, if you start at the end and work your way back, it comes out better. So, Chitta Prasadanam. Chitta is, of course, mind in the very large, boundless or infinite sense of mind. And prasadanam is the purification to make clear or calm, tranquil, the chitta. And so this is done by bhavanata. This is done by either contemplating, being with, radiating, just being of that nature of these four Brahma Viharas. And so they are Maitri, which is friendliness, or I think that's a good word. Loving kindness is a popular translation. And then Karuna is compassion. Mudita means to be, have sympathetic joy. So if I meet someone who's actually happy, I'm happy that they're happy. And it's kind of a natural state. Like if you meet, we get brief moments of it. Like with, again, I always use the analogy of puppies and kittens, but that's a good one. You breathe, you go, ah. And rather than envious. Okay, that comes later. And then upekshanam means to see, but to see over, not in the sense of overlooking, but to see beyond the surface, to see deeply, or to see into infinity, is that. And these four things relate to sukha, dukkha, punya, apunya, as vishayanam, or as objects of contemplation. And so if you meet or encounter the state of maitri, or sukha, which is just happiness, and this is as much inside of you as if you meet it out in the world in other beings. And so it's very important that it works both ways. Then, if you meet happiness, then it's just like a natural friendliness. In other words, you're happy for the happiness. And often that has a contagious quality, which is wonderful. If someone sees that you are happy, because these are natural, then they become happy. And then it's like...
Then you become more happy, and then they become...
More and more happy, because you're happy.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like an explosion, in the good sense of the word. Okay. And they say this is how stars are formed in astronomy. Okay, and then, but if you meet dukkha, which, since, as we learn that sarvam dukkham, that everything when misperceived is essentially suffering, it's very likely that we'll be encountering states of suffering. And what you practice then is compassion and karuna. And this is very important, and it's a kind of compassion that holds, is sympathetic, empathetic, but also isn't brought down by it because it's a contemplative state. It's just like...
And when you practice this form of compassion, you can really not let it bring you down and get you sucked into the suffering yourself by giving it space, like holding a crying child in your arms rather than, freaking out and trying to get the kid to not cry. You give them support and give them what they need. And so a quality that allows the compassion to really flow smoothly is, of course, your own state of being grounded, but also the ability to look clearly and determine what needs to be done or what you believe can be done to either alleviate the suffering or give space to the suffering, knowing that sometimes there's actually nothing to do except
give space,
give
or
space.
Give attention.
Bear witness.
Bear witness. That's a hint.
Yeah.
In the Yoga Sutra. And then, similar, same thing, but these are more specific cases. When you encounter another person, or even in yourself, I always think, another person, but remember, you are part of the group. And so if you find this state of punya, which is a very often translated as pious, which is just worst translation possible. I think good. I think good is a better translation. Nice. Someone who's really evolved and is starting to see reality on a deeper level and who's starting to interact intelligently. And so that would be a great person, or at least a nice person. And occasionally, even in ourselves, briefly these states or these storylines of ourselves will manifest, and then in others. And so when that happens, then you practice mudita, which is you're happy that they're happy, sympathetic joy.
And again, it's sort of an infectious feeling that, someone with great presence and sincerity and truthfulness, sort of reflecting truthfulness, appears in your presence, and it stimulates those feelings within you. So all of these practices are sort of symbiotic practices that happen, as Richard said, naturally. And when we bring focused attention to them, we can then cultivate those feelings. But they're also natural states that sort of, once they start rolling in relationship with another person, then it's just sort of a natural state.
And so punya could be just a kind neighbor, or it could be, a great saintly being, or it could be, some great Ishvara or Bodhisattva. That could also be punya. And then apunya is just the opposite. And this would be a being who is bad. I think that's the and bad in the context of this is someone who actually creates misery for others, or creates one interpreted is they also create deep, deep hellish states for themselves. But we often, particularly in the modern world, but as I study history, I think it's also in the ancient world, that there are certain beings, usually humans, the generous use of that term, who really cause misery for others. And it could be, from the most horrible, events historically, from genocides to wars, just to basic cruelty. And these states also exist within ourselves, almost as often as the shadows to the personality, the story that we like to hold on to. Oh, that's me. And we don't see that the shadow side of that is actually also part of the fabric that is you. And so it's very difficult. So in this case, we practice upeksha, which is this looking not just at the immediate surface of it, but to look through it, not in the sense of ignoring it, but to look deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into it, to the point where you see that there is actually no separate self in it, and you start to see the complexity of the story, both within yourself. And this is a very big one.
And it's difficult. So
it's probably initially the most difficult one, yeah. I don't know if anyone who's listening has ever gotten angry at another person or been, what would I say, disgusted or displeased at the behavior of some being, even politicians. And then you kind of dwell on it, and you can become obsessed by it, and you become angry, and you just want to,
do something
about it. And that is also a healthy response in terms of your organism. It's just like, oh, there's something that has to be fixed.
And sometimes that's the appropriate action. But sometimes, like with compassion, when someone's suffering, because ultimately, as Richard said, the person who is really behaving in these abominable ways, when you look beyond and over and deeply into the circumstance, you see that beneath it all is a profound suffering. And so just like when you are dealing with blatant suffering, you give it space and you hold it, and sometimes taking action is appropriate, and sometimes the only action is non-action that will really be beneficial for the circumstances. So it's the ability to be able to see what will serve the whole, the greater whole.
And again, it's seeing with true compassion, even beings that normally are dangerous beings. And anyway, so to see this way causes the mind becomes prasad. It becomes clear and calm. And prasad is more than clear and calm. It's nice. It has a nice quality to it. And that's why it's also used for food that has been offered to all others, which would be a form of the practice of the Brahma Viharas, is to offer your food to all beings. And then the leftovers, and sometimes they'll actually take it, which will leave you with an empty plate. We've experienced that at our house recently. That's mice. But whatever is left, that is called prasad, which actually is this kind clarity of mind.
And an important factor with this upekshanam is that if you cannot or do not or choose not to interact in a way that holds the one who's suffering, who is evil, possibly even, then what happens within you is very, very destructive. Not only this idea of when you become obsessed with someone who's, and we have politicians these days who are doing things that are outrageous and are unpleasant. And it's a wonderful time in the world where more and more people are pausing and not doing outrageous things, so that those who are doing outrageous things stand out as even more blatantly
More crazy.
as more crazy. But if you cannot hold them, then
in your heart, which
yeah.
no small order. What happens is you become angry, and actually that part of you that is similar to them is manifesting. And if you look at it historically, one group of people will be, offended, attacked by another group or another emperor or king or, psychopath or something. And then because of the injustice, the horror created by that person, they almost form a cult around being against that. And historically, they will often manifest with as much extremism, with as much prejudice, with as much misperception of others as that which they were reacting to. And if you look at the history of different wars and religions, you'll see, oh my God, it's sometimes the reaction, which was to save the world from this one horrible being, is worse than what the horrible being was originally doing. And this is, of course, on a big scale. You can look on the library, but this also happens on a small scale inside of our own minds as we sit to do our meditation practice.
And so if you are unable to really embrace those who you find very distasteful and give them the support they need but that doesn't mean you have to agree with them. In fact, using discriminating awareness and not agreeing with what they are doing and taking action to counter what they're doing when it's appropriate is great. But if you haven't invited them into the core of your heart, and you can try this yourself at home with, and I found it actually with with Donald Trump these days, where he has been so difficult with some of the things he said that people are suffering, poisoning themselves, or becoming very confused about how to be safe, that if I don't hold him in the core of my heart, I become really angry about it. And then it's like I can't do any of the other Brahma Viharas properly because I have this knot in my heart. Nor can I do, a good smooth breathing practice, nor can I do a good focused asana practice, or study well, or try to write, or do some of those things. And so the trick is to figure out when you have something like that in your life, what do you actually do to make it so that you have space in the core of the heart to embrace all beings without and still being able to do discriminating awareness, which is a difficult task. And Richard often has a kind of easy solution that you give.
Oh, well, first of all, let me backtrack one thought, is that your relationships with others, even relationships within the fantasy world of your own mind, affect how the sensation patterns move through the entirety of your body. And then you might say, well, what is my body? Well, yoga is looking into that, just like, what is all this? That if there's a lack of love or a lack of discriminating awareness or intelligence, you misperceive other beings, and then you don't actually hold them. It's not just a metaphor. You don't locate them as you would your beloved, right, on this line through the center of the heart, up through. And then actual yoga practice is very difficult. And so it's something like pranayama, where you're trying to undo all of the blockages to sensation patterns in the historical phenomenon of your body, it just doesn't work. You can huff and puff, and, do your bastrikas and it just, you can warp it, but somehow it just doesn't work. You can't quite fall in. And oftentimes what we discover through practice is that the actual problem is, well, so-and-so said such and such, or, and it has to do with a misperception of other beings. And remember, the stories of you are also other beings. You might even be misperceiving the stories of you. And that places other beings, like a pain in the neck, or a pain in the gluteus maximus, or a pain in the knee, pain in the foot. Okay, and that's sometimes we talk about other people and we simply talk about them as we have located them in our own embodiment, which is and so somehow to get all beings into the core of your heart. And fortunately, we have the example of the Russian nesting dolls. Okay, and so if you can find a being who has all beings in the core of their heart, okay, which in the Yoga Sutra would be Ishvara, who is the primordial teacher, or say the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, or a great enlightened being. You just, in your mind, and this doesn't mean physically put them into your heart, because they could be really big and kind of, okay, remember this is metaphor, but if you locate them in your heart, and they've got all other beings in their heart, you've got all beings in your heart. At least as long as you can keep them in your heart. And it's a good trick. And then breathing is easy. Even if your pranayama is not advanced and you can't hold your breath, for 6 days or something, just the movement of breath itself is delightful. And so this verse 33 is
it's a powerful verse.
It's powerful. It's very tricky.
And if that metaphor of putting all beings in the core of your heart through nesting doll technique doesn't work for you, another thing that works for me is to imagine the core of the heart within oneself as this limitless space that is indeed true, that we're all connected through our hearts to infinite space, infinite time. And so therefore, you could imagine that your heart expands to infinity, to beyond where you could even imagine there being a place. So it isn't restrained by your own body.
So you could put the whole universe, or universes, if you like.
Yeah, or just take this unpleasant being and put them way out there somewhere, and then gradually
in a different galaxy.
In a different galaxy.
But then embrace
the
way
whole thing.
Beyond that galaxy.
And so they're there. And in a way, this is just, it's a method of acknowledging and a method of not losing oneself. And we use that term loosely because when you do acknowledge yourself too much, that becomes the next problem that we're going to talk about. But, if you don't lose your sense of integrity, then you can practice the practice of upekshanam in some way by really embracing the other. And then when they are far away from you in the corner of a universe, or if they're in the center of the heart in a nesting doll technique, then there is the ability to see beyond their actions and to see beyond your own actions and your own responses, and therefore to practice compassion because you start to see the inherent suffering of the situation at hand.
And this is not to say that there won't be times where you should actually take action. You know, to be courageous. You know, shraddha, virya. You know, stand up and like. Sometimes to protect other beings, you have to, you know, eliminate other beings. Okay. And that's just true historically. So what happens is that we are often placed in ethical dilemmas, you know, which is the better thing to do, to eliminate my, you know, sick person who's in my heart but who happens to be causing hell for other beings. If I can eliminate them, given the right, and you don't know, you just have to, there are many cases where it would be obvious, you know, if you had, you know, your child in a little baby scooter and some large insect jumped out of the jungle and started biting it, you would probably smite the little insect out of the way. And, you know, and then you would understand, you know, there was an amazing insect, you know, or a mosquito or something, but it's oftentimes you are placed in those situations. And everyone is placed in those ethical dilemma situations. Even people who go off to the hills to live in isolation. They are
by choice,
or because they are exiled
by the coronavirus.
Yeah, by some virus or something. You're still going to be in minor ethical dilemmas with just the organic life around you. Lizards and bugs and toads and frogs and birds and even mold, you know. Very fascinating.
And so we have offered to us these practices that are things that you can actually do, and we'll talk a little more about how to actually practice these practices. But to practice kindness, maitri, to practice compassion, to practice sympathetic joy, and to practice upekshanam. And even if on some levels you're practicing them just to practice, like you might practice postures in yoga that you can't quite do yet, but you try to be nice to people when you see that they're happy, rather than falling prey to what is the difficulty in life that we'll talk about in just a second, which is the shadow sides to these boundless abodes. That you just practice them to the point that they become, it's like the wheels of kindness are oiled within you, and it becomes a natural state that you already have within your capacity, but you may have just forgotten how to do it. So there are practices that are said in some ways to be things you can do that will then really help you to see infinity everywhere. And that's where sometimes the ego comes in and co-opts the situation, because you think, oh, good, well, if I practice kindness, then I will have happiness and I will be a better person and I will get whatever it is I get. Or if I'm with a punya person and I feel this sympathetic joy, then at some point, then I will have all these might feel jealousy, because, or you might feel, if you see someone who's suffering, instead of really tapping into the resource of compassion within yourself, you might end up feeling kind of annoyed or over demanded upon, so that, or resentful.
Yeah.
And
they deserve suffering. They're idiots.
Yeah.
Or you meet someone and you have that brief flash of happiness because you see the innocence. And then, but the ego takes over and says, let me get a selfie of me being compassionate so I can post it. Okay, and so the ego is right there, because these are great practices, meaning if you sit down and, I don't feel so good today, and there's probably a lot of causes for that, but if you go through your mind, may all beings be happy, loka samasta sukhino bhavantu, and then you go through that of deliberately calling beings up to mind. That is a practice, and then the mind says, oh, a practice has a result, which is I become radiant, I become, or whatever language you'd like to use, I will disappear, and then the ego will be shunyata itself or something. And then, watch out, because this is the dark side of these practices.
Yeah. And that's okay too, if that happens, if suddenly in this process of doing that, which is a natural thing that happens, sometimes to all of us, if you recognize and observe the process itself. So in the Yoga Sutra, after the Brahma Viharas, and we talked about it last week, but there are things you do, like at the end of an exhale, allowing the breath to stay out briefly. And then so you exhale, and what that really does is get you grounded, get you in the body, so that you can then, it's almost like you snap back to reality, and you can get back on the train of the Brahma Viharas, of the sincerity of that. And I was thinking this morning when I was thinking about this topic, that the Brahma Viharas, it's like, where do you start with them? Do you start with compassion? Do you start with kindness? Do you start with upekshanam? Like, where is it you jump into the string of them? When we think of the kleshas, we think, well, they kind of build from avidya, and then you could make a case for that being true for this too. But the more I thought about it, the more it struck me that it's almost like a Mobius strip of infinity, of these qualities of mind and sensation, bodily sensation, that are natural qualities we have. And so it doesn't really matter where you jump on the strip, so long as you keep coming back to this interconnectedness of these four practices.
It's a merry-go-round of chakra that is actually Mobius, because somebody twisted it. Somebody with a sense of humor did a vritti on it. And you're already on it.
Yeah.
That's the thing. And so I think it's best to start where you are.
Wherever you happen to be.
Yeah, because you're sitting down and you're just going to, okay, I'm just going to observe what's arising. That's a good idea.
Yeah.
And so there are all of these, after the Brahma Viharas, there's the idea that you could exhale and hold your breath. And then the next verse is all of a sudden, then you'll be able to stabilize the mind. You can hold the mind by the watching sensations as they rise and twist and change, which is very, that's mindfulness practice. And of course the sensations as prana are the kind of the historical basis for the different paths. And then, you can meditate on happy states of mind, luminous states, or happy luminous beings. And there are all these different things that you can do. And then it gets to verse 41, which is another puzzling verse that, this is about a 10 lifetime verse. And it's the one that compares, we're talking about samapati now. And samapati is another word for the mind that is completely equal. In other words, the vision is so clear that it's equal. And so you get this state of samapati, and or the nirodha of the chitta vrittis, by when the mind acts like a clear jewel. And so if you place a really nice quality jewel on something, oftentimes you don't, and you just look at it, sometimes you don't actually see the jewel, you see all the reflections, or, different transmissions of light through the jewel. Mm-hmm. And so the clear mind is like that jewel. And so they say that you're going to be practicing with either what is called the grahitra, which is you're going to be meditating on the perceiver. Sometimes, okay, there I am doing this, there I am. Now I'm breathing out, okay. I'm meditating on the story of me, and then it'll flip over to, now I'm meditating on my knee, and now I'm meditating on all beings. And so that's the subject and then the object, but then you end up meditating on the grahana, which is the actual process of the mind reflecting. And so occasionally you'll notice thinking. And I think I'm thinking. Okay. And so this is, again, where the mind starts to go into a paradoxical loop that then shows that there is actually no perceiver ultimately, and nothing that is being perceived. Meaning, no thing that is separate from the infinity of its background, and no, as a perceiver, as a subject, okay, the ones that we worry about all the time, or as an object. Each object is then infinitely deep. And then the process of perception itself is where you're going to get to...
It becomes one of those experiences that's stunning, that allows the mind to simply just let go of the need to know, and the need to process everything, and the need to decide what to do or what not to do, etc. And it becomes this stunning experience to the senses, to the perceptions, to the names of forms that you see. All of what is before you is stunning, and then you disappear. And so many of these yoga practices, the true joy in the practices themselves is experienced, and the sort of the juice of the practices is experienced when you disappear. And we've all experienced that, those of us who've practiced yoga, where you're just doing your thing and suddenly it's like you're part of everything else, and for just an instant you have not been aware of your little part of the story.
But even if your part of the story arises,
then
it's not you.
Yeah.
And you have that perception
see that.
of that.
You see that.
And so then you're still, even though you're seeing, wow, this is awesome, in the right context, there's still the ability to act and to do, to rush and help somebody, to
Which
hurry
is
up and do something,
really
or hurry up and don't do something.
And in some ways, that's really why the next thing is that you get grounded. You exhale the breath and you get grounded, and once you're grounded, then you can make choices that are intelligent. If you're, just off in a bliss state, feeling infinity,
then
it's
the
harder.
ego, you'll get attached to that. Oh, I like bliss. I prefer it very much to this miserable world. Okay, and then you got to start over because you just went boom. And we all the time. Well, I know from my own experience. We're going up and saying, "Oh wow, I'm really getting up there." Like I'm at stage 4 billion in the yoga ladder or something, and then the ego does something like that. It has any. It says. Oh, and then there's the impermanent world of space and time. Yeah. And even an attitude towards it of like, who needs it? Okay, that is because there the ego has manifested again. And it's time to start over.
And so,
not you, but
yeah.
So.
And we thought this might be an interesting topic to go into at this juncture, because some of the questions we've had in emails and on other things that we've been doing online, etc., the questions have really focused around a great deal of suffering that people are experiencing, as well as sort of confusion about what does this mean for the future? What will the future look like after we're all not so much on lockdown anymore? And what can I do during this sort of, it's almost like a holding pattern that we're in. What can I do now to alleviate my own suffering or the suffering of those around me? And that's a difficult thing, but it's also a wonderful challenge that we all face, to realize that there is just a huge amount of overt suffering in the world right now, at this very moment, with people very ill, unable to breathe, unable to be with their loved ones as they're dying, or being able to be with your loved one as they are dying, or having the fear and confusion of, oh my gosh, am I going to get sick? Am I a silent carrier? Am I going to infect someone else? There's a huge amount of this sort of fear rooted in the culture right now. And as a result of that, there is quite a lot of suffering arising. And so being able to pause and have even a small tool that we can use to practice compassion, whatever that means, towards those who are suffering, perhaps ourselves first, perhaps someone we love, perhaps someone we have read about, or a group of people that we've read about, knowing that equally there is a great deal of opportunity arising in the world right now. There is an opportunity for learning, an opportunity for change, an opportunity to interact with the other in non-habitual ways, to interact with ourselves in our work and our approach to life in non-habitual ways. So that almost counterbalances some of the suffering that is going on. And if we can tap into the good things that are happening, even if they're minuscule, it's almost as if we are beginning to practice a kind of Maitri practice of resonating with the good things, realizing that always good things exist with difficult things, and difficult things exist with good things. You have to have that contrast to be able to differentiate, but that we get fixated, like Richard said, on I just want the good things. And our world for a long time now has been in the illusion that we can all just live with just the good things, rather than realizing all along, even before the coronavirus, there have been millions and millions of people suffering every day for various different reasons.
And they've all died.
And they've all died. And so, yeah. So it's what we're hoping is that if you can start with being grounded, recognize the sense within the body of strength that equanimity or upekshanam actually gives you, a strength that is way beyond who you are, but sort of the stability that you get from being part of an interconnected interpenetrating whole. That strength in concert with the softness that is reflected through compassion and through kindness and through the sympathetic joy, the softness that those bring to our lives, that gives you a foundation from which to take a step towards at least giving space, if not taking action, to help alleviate suffering, whether it's your own, whether it's your child, whether it's your loved one, or a bigger situation beyond you. And a way to really get that in your blood and get that in your body is to simply practice the Brahma Viharas. Noticing that, yes, when I see someone suffering, I can tap into the reservoir that Richard always describes so beautifully, the reservoir of compassion that is
in the root of the
in the
palate.
root of the palate.
Makes you smile.
It makes you smile. And it's there all the time.
And the fact is we're in good company because every being that manifests doesn't manifest that long. And this is true, not just on this planet, but you just go out through the entire universe, and it's like one big family. And so sometimes with yoga, when the ego thinks about it, it says, "Oh, I'm just going to be alone forever." And the fact is, you're going to take shelter in this being that is truly you, that is neither alone. It is alone in the sense of kaivalyam, but all beings are there in your heart. Mm-hmm. And so the best of the company is there in that state of nirodha. I was just thinking that there are some mandalas, yantras that are used, and a very good one is when you first enter the yantra, there are 4 gates. It's like a temple, you go around it. But the one that actually lets you get into the inner space is a doorway that is painted black. And the goddess in charge of that door is Kali. And she's quite scary because she's the elimination of all beings in all the universes all the time. And then the one that everybody wants, even in their ego or crazy state of mind, is they want Lakshmi, who's the opposite gate. And she's all yellow and cheery, and she's got money coming out of her hands and gold. And she's great, but you can't enter the mandala except through realizing the fact of impermanence. Okay. And so impermanence is absolutely scary for someone who doesn't understand, who hasn't done the practice to have these experiences. But that same thing, the fact of impermanence is the fact of absolute joy. It is absolute joy because it's like. So anyway.
So we thought
we're in good company.
Yeah, and we thought we would close today with a very brief sort of loving kindness meditation. And if you'd like to join, wonderful, and if not, that's fine too. So take a moment to just settle and find your sense of dropping into your own body, dropping into the sensation of breath, the exhale that allows you to connect deeply into the earth, as if growing roots in fertile soil, dropping down to connect deeply. and feeling the sense of the body dropping into the earth and the earth providing support. So as we drop down, there is a feeling of lifting and of support from beneath. And dropping down, the feeling of support can rise through the body into the very core of the heart, in the center of the chest, but it's not just the chest. The core of the heart expands in all directions, front and back and sides, and even inside and outside, up and down. It expands in all directions, even past to future, spaciousness, vastness. And allow the mind to settle into the core of the heart, with the palate released and the tongue soft. Spaciousness. And then bring to mind the image of someone who is very happy. And we've done this before. It could be a kitten or a puppy. It could be yourself. It could be a loved one, your child. Someone who's very, very happy. And look deeply into the eyes of that other one. Connecting deeply through not only the eyes, but through the heart to heart. A sensation of connectedness. Spaciousness. Vastness. And then bring to mind an image of yourself. And allow that image to fill itself out in whatever way feels possible. And it may be an image of yourself now, and there may be great joy, or there may be confusion or suffering. But let whatever it is that you see as yourself be there. An image of yourself. And then I will say a few phrases. And as I say the phrases, I will pause, and after I say them, if you wish to repeat what I've said, offering to yourself these gifts of kindness. Please do so, and if not, that's okay too. So as we imagine in the core of our hearts, there we are, in whatever state of being we happen to be. May I be safe. May I be safe. May I be well. May I be well. May I find my way. May I find my way. May I be happy. May I be happy. May I be filled with compassion. May I be filled with compassion. May I be safe. May I be well. May I find my way. May I be happy. May I be filled with compassion. And if your eyes are closed, feel free to leave them closed and just sit for a while. If your eyes are open, that's fine. But let that sense of resonance, of connecting to what is your true nature, let that fill you, nourish you, and nourish others through the strength it gives you.